What's up, guys? Thank you for joining me. In the last video, I proved that Mamdani was nothing more than a terrorist-loving thug who hates Jews. I showed you the video and the tweets that exposed him. Today, I'm going to prove that he's lying about his tax plan and is absolutely clueless about basic economics. I'm also going to show you how his policies are going to destroy the New York City housing market and raise prices on everyday consumer items. I have the data and the video to back it up. We're going to go through it next. All right, so here's Zohran telling us why he won. It turns out he won because there's an affordability crisis.
I think ultimately it was the focus on the fact that we live in the most expensive city in the United States of America. It's also the wealthiest city in the wealthiest country in the history of the world, and yet 1 in 4 New Yorkers are living in poverty, and the rest are seemingly trapped in a state of anxiety. And what we've seen is that this is a city that needs to be affordable for the people who build it every day. Our focus was on exactly that. And by keeping that focus on an economic agenda, we showed New Yorkers that this could be more than just a museum of what once was. It could be a living, breathing testament to possibility.
Why is there an affordability crisis in New York City, Zohran? It's because of Democrats like you. Since 1913, New York City has elected just 4 Republicans to be its mayor. And this includes Michael Bloomberg, who switched to an independent, and Lindsay, who switched to a Democrat. The other 2 Republican mayors were Giuliani and LaGuardia. That's just 4 Republican mayors over the last 113 years. So you're trying to fix an affordability crisis that was created by the same policies you're trying to implement today. Does this make sense?
What would your day one priority be?
The first thing is living up to these promises that I've made, because I've made them because I intend to keep them. And in a city of about 8.5 million people, close to 2.5 million New Yorkers live in rent-stabilized housing. The mayor, through a board called the Rent Guidelines Board, sets whether or not those rents increase or stay the same. The previous mayoral administration froze the rent 3 times. This one, led by Mayor Adams, increased it by 9%. So the first thing that I would do is start to constitute a board that votes in reflection of reality. And the reality I'm speaking of is that the median household income of those tenants is $60,000 a year. The landlords of those units have seen their profits increase by 12%. It's time for relief for working class New Yorkers.
He loves talking about freezing the rent. This is what that means for those who aren't in New York City. If you live in a building that has 6 units or more, you are only allowed to raise the rent by a certain amount. That amount is determined by the New York City Rent Guidelines Board. It's a group made up of 9 people, all of whom are appointed by the mayor. In their most recent meeting, they allowed a rent increase of just 3%, which is not only lower than the rate of inflation, but the same board admits that the cost for maintaining those buildings rose 6.3% and are expected to rise another 4.8% this year. This is according to their own report. What does this mean? It means that landlords are getting a negative return. If you're only allowing them to raise the rent 3%, but the costs are going up 7%, property owners are going to take those rental units off the market, especially if they're not allowed to raise the rent to cover the cost of renovating those apartments when tenants move out.
New laws meant to limit rent increases and protect tenants in the city could actually be having adverse effects.
One group representing rent-stabilized landlords says that thousands of apartments are now being kept vacant.
A bathroom reduced to rubble, new window frames, and
here was the rest of the sink going down.
It's an abandoned apartment renovation. Morsania landlord Oscar Perez showed us the roughly $45,000 in work he stopped months ago. Previously, he could have recouped the money by raising the rent about $100 a month for the next tenant. But a new law signed in June only gives him leeway to recoup about $10 a month.
In reality, I'm not warehousing. I just don't have the money to finish it.
1/3 of housing in New York City is considered rent regulated. Most of it dates back to the early 1900s, and the average tenant stays more than a decade, which means a lot of upkeep is needed. Landlord Stephanie Kernan says her rental income after costs was $17,000 less, yet she needs double that to fix her roof.
It's making it difficult to do other improvement.
A reporter at The Real Deal says some landlords are keeping units vacant on purpose.
Can you imagine? That lady nets $17,000 a year in rental income, but she needs twice that amount to fix the roof. Now you could say just save the money and get the roof fixed in year 3. Okay, but it's going to leak until then. And that other guy spent $45,000 to renovate that apartment, and the city tells him the most he can increase the rent is $10 a month. You know how long it's going to take him to make that money back? 375 years. Now you know why we have slums. And it's going to get worse on the Mamdani because he's not just talking about keeping the rent increase below the rate of inflation. He wants to freeze it completely and have no rent increase at all. So that negative return we just talked about landlords getting, it's going to get a lot worse. Why would a developer want to invest in a building that guarantees him a negative return? And why would a bank want to lend money on these type of projects?
Tell me how you're going to do this. I got to put $50 million into a building to build it, just to get it going. And the market's going to want probably somewhere between an 8 and 11% return on the construction financing. And then when I stabilize it, they'll be happy with 7-8% return. You're telling me I have to have frozen rent rates, even going into 3% inflation. How am I going to be able to raise any money for a new build? Not just me, anybody. How can anybody, including you, by the way, you, Mr. Free for Everything guy, how are you going to get that money out of the market when the return is negative? Now, what is the answer to that? Because people should ask themselves, how are we going to get a new building to live in or to have an office in or a store in the city of New York, which is in itself a country, when there's a zero return policy, a negative return policy on capital? Now, that's what's going on here. So if you're thinking of voting for this guy, you're going to continue to live in rat holes as they deteriorate. But worse, there'll be no new builds.
Right.
Zero.
Yeah.
You know, liberals are always complaining that banks won't invest in certain areas. This is one of the reasons why. And when banks stop investing and landlords stop maintaining their properties, you end up with the ghetto. And I can tell you this from firsthand knowledge. In 1992, when I came on the job, they sent me to the 2-8. The 2-8, for those who don't know, is Central Harlem. It was a complete, disgusting dumping ground. You had buildings, one after another, completely sealed. And not sealed with plywood, they were sealed with cinder blocks. Buildings were in such poor condition that a lot of them were leaning to one side. And in the 6 years that I worked there, I never saw a new building go up or a new store or restaurant open. It was an incredibly depressing place to work. I couldn't imagine living there. But look at it today. It is thriving. It is absolutely beautiful. You know, I'm not saying that there's no crime, but it's nowhere near the ghetto that I worked in. And it all started with the banks. The banks were finally able to make money. They didn't invest because they were nice. They invested because they were finally able to see a positive return on their investment. And the houses that they were trying to give away in the 90s for $10,000, today you can't touch unless you have millions. And it's great to see. It's great to see a community come back to what it once was. But it all started with the banks. But as Kevin O'Leary says, you're not going to find a bank to invest in a building that offers them a negative return. Now you know why rent control leads to slums and destroys neighborhoods. But the people that voted Mamdani, all they hear is freeze the rent, and that's all they think about. Now let's go back to Kristen.
And ultimately, we're seeing that our vision to tax the top 1% of New Yorkers, these are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more, and our proposal is to just tax them by 2% additional, is something that has broad support and will continue to increase that support over the next few months and years.
So you think you're going to be able to twist Governor Hochul's arm and get her to support raising taxes? I mean, what about the fact that she says she's concerned New Yorkers might leave? They might go to Florida.
I think it's time for a leadership that doesn't twist arms, but rather builds partnership. And I'm looking forward to having that with the governor, because ultimately my policies, my vision, it's driven by an assessment of what's actually happening. The Fiscal Policy Institute found that the top 1% of New Yorkers leave at 1/4 the rate of other income groups. And when they do leave, it's actually to other states considered high tax, New Jersey, California. So it's not fiscal policy, it's quality of life. And ultimately, the reason I want to increase these taxes on the top 1%, the most profitable corporations, is to increase quality of life for everyone, including those who are going to be taxed.
He said so many things there that weren't true. We got to break it down into smaller segments. We're going to start with his tax plan.
our vision to tax the top 1% of New Yorkers. These are New Yorkers who make $1 million a year or more, and our proposal is to just tax them by 2% additional, is something that has broad support and will continue to increase that support over the next few months and years.
He says it like it's no big deal, right? It's just 2%, but he's intentionally misleading you by giving you only the raw number. Raw numbers mean nothing. In order to accurately judge the impact of an increase, you need to deal with it in percentage terms. I'm going to give you an example. Let's say we're going to use $100 in this example, the raw number. Let's say you're buying a car, a used car, for $10,000. And you get to the dealer and he says, you know what? I have to charge you an extra $100 for whatever, plates. You say, okay, instead of spending $10,000, now I'm spending $10,100. He increased the price by just 1%. So it's not that big a deal. Now let's say you're buying something for $1,000 and you find out that you have to pay an extra $100. Now it's going from $1,000 to $1,100. That's an increase of 10%. So you feel it more. Now let's take it a step further. Let's say you pay your landscaper $100 to mow your lawn. And he tells you, I have to raise it $100 to $200. That's insane because you just doubled the price. Going from $100 to $200 is a 100% increase. Now the example I gave you was the same raw number of $100, but the impact ranged from just 1% where it wasn't a big deal to 100% where the price actually doubled. That's why he's misleading you. In order to judge the difference, we need to see where we're starting off. Now let's apply this to his tax plan. We can see that the highest tax rate in New York City right now is just under 4%, 3.876. Raising it an additional 2% brings it to 5.876. Again, 2% sounds like nothing, but when you're raising it from just under 4% to just under 6%, that's a jump of more than 51%. 51%. Let's put this in perspective. Let's say you're paying rent right now to your landlord of $2,000 a month, and he raises it 50%. Now you're paying $3,000 a month. Would that bother you? Let's go the other way. Let's say you're making $80,000 a year at your job, and your boss says, I need to cut your salary by 50%. Now you're only making 40. Would you be okay with that? Of course not. So don't be fooled. He's giving you the raw number to mislead you. When he says it's only 2%, keep in mind, it's actually an increase of 51%. And the only person, as far as I know, that pushed back on this is Erin Burnett.
Increasing the top corporate tax rate of New York to match that of New Jersey, that raises $5 billion, and increasing income taxes on the top 1% of New Yorkers who make $1 million or more a year by 2%. Both of these things, after they come to fruition, you're still paying less than you did before Trump.
Okay. On the city tax, though, and I know that takes effect with people right now, that top rate of people of 50,000 or more. So if you're going to be adding 2% to people at $1 million, that I just did the math, right? Well, but that's going to be an increase of 51% of what they pay now.
She said it, but he doesn't like that she said it. Let's not describe it as a 51% increase, Erin. Let's keep calling it a 2% increase. Watch him correct her.
I'm not saying cry for them. I'm saying if they leave, you're not going to get that money. And when you increase someone's taxes by 51%, aren't a lot of people going to leave?
We're saying we're increasing it by 2% of what it is right now.
2%, Erin. 2%. There's no need to get into the weeds here and tell the people the truth. We're going to keep calling it 2% because it doesn't seem like a big deal. Again, raw numbers mean nothing. And he does the same thing with the corporate tax rate when he says he wants to raise New York's corporate tax rate to match that of New Jersey's. And by the way, he's not limiting it to businesses who are headquartered here.
Match the state's top corporate tax rate to that of New Jersey. We are at 7.25%. They're at 11.5%. Corporations can pay it over there. They can pay it over here. And the beauty of it is that it doesn't just apply to corporations headquartered in New York City. Because when you say this, people will say, well, they're going to go to Florida. Wherever you are headquartered, as long as you do business in the state of New York, you are taxable for that corporate tax.
Sounds great, right? If you're a socialist. It doesn't matter if they're headquartered here, as long as they do business in New York, we're going to tax them. You don't have to be an economist to realize the consequences of this. Not only are companies going to move their headquarters out of New York, but they're also going to stop selling their products here because of the extra tax. And when you have hundreds and thousands of companies doing this, you decrease the supply of available goods. And everyone knows that when the supply of goods goes down, prices go up. Anyone who took an economics class knows this. He knows it. He's just lying to you. The second thing we need to know is how much of a rate increase that actually is. Again, he says we're going to raise the corporate tax rate of New York, which is 7.25, to match New Jersey's, which is 11.5. In raw numbers, it's just 4.25%. Doesn't sound like a big deal. But again, he's misleading you because that's actually an increase of 59%. And again, the only person who pushed back on this was Aaron Burnett.
That corporate tax rate that you're talking about, that's a big increase.
That's matching 7.25% going to 11.5%. And the point of it is that if it works for our regional neighbor, why can't it work for us?
It can't work for us because Jersey doesn't have a separate corporate tax the way New York City does. In Jersey, you pay the same 11.5% throughout the entire state. It doesn't matter what city, county, or town you're in. But in New York, there are two corporate taxes. The one in New York State at 7.25%, that's the one that he wants to raise. And New York City has its own separate corporate income tax rate of 8.85%. And when you add that to the newly proposed New York State income tax rate, you get a combined total tax on New York City businesses of 20.35%, which is almost double what it is in New Jersey. And after the money is distributed from the businesses to the people who own it, they got to pay personal income tax too. Because remember, personal income tax and corporate income tax are completely different. So when you combine the top rate of personal income tax of 37% to the 20% tax rate of doing business in New York City, you have a total tax rate of 57%. Can you imagine? The government is taking 57 cents out of every dollar you earn. You're telling me the wealthy are going to want to hang around when they're only allowed to keep 43% of what they make? They're going to leave, regardless of what he tells you.
Ultimately, I'm guided by the facts. The Fiscal Policy Institute did an analysis of the top 1% of New Yorkers and found that they leave the city at 1/4 the rate of other income categories.
He loves quoting from that report. Here he is again.
The Fiscal Policy Institute did an analysis of the top 1% of New Yorkers. They found they leave at 1/4 the rate of other income brackets. The Fiscal Policy Institute found that the top 1% of New Yorkers leave at 1/4 the rate of other income groups.
He's lying. That is not what the report says. That is the rate that they leave New York State, not New York City. This report is based on out-migration of New York State. In fact, the title of the report is called Who is Leaving New York State? Maybe that's the rate they leave Albany or Buffalo, but not New York City. New York City is completely different. In fact, the report warns us that there are key differences between those who are leaving New York State and those who are leaving New York City. And on page 16, it states the following. This report focuses on outmigration from New York State. The patterns of the city's outmigration differ in key respects. So his claim that millionaires don't leave New York City when taxes are raised is incredibly misleading. And what exactly does that mean when taxes are raised? He doesn't tell us how much they were raised in the study. And he does this on purpose. He simply refers to it as taxes are increased, but he doesn't say how much. So you know right away that you got to go into the details because he's about to scam us again. And when you read the report from the Fiscal Policy Institute that he loves to quote, it turns out that they examined just one tax increase. Back in 2020, the top tax rate for those making $1 million in New York State was 8.82%. But the new tax rate for those making $1 million in 2021 raised it to 9.65%, an increase of just 9.4%. How much does the commie want to raise it today? 51%. Do you see the lie? He's telling you that the wealthy don't move when their taxes go up, but he doesn't tell you that that's based on a report that examined a tax increase of just 9.4%. Meanwhile, he wants to raise it more than 5 times that amount. And keep in mind, the Fiscal Policy Institute did not examine any tax rates in New York City. It's a report about New York State only. In fact, during the years that they analyzed, tax rates in New York City didn't change. Do you see the scam? He's telling you that people are not going to leave New York City when New York City tax rates go up. And he's basing that on a report when the New York City tax rate didn't even change. This is a scam. Now let's go back to Aaron. Listen to him lie about where the people are moving.
They leave the city at 1/4 the rate of other income categories. And when they do leave, they leave to what are called high tax states, New Jersey, California.
He said the exact same thing to Kristen.
And when they do leave, it's actually to other states considered high tax, New Jersey, California.
He says they leave to go to high tax states, but he doesn't define what that is. What are high tax states? He mentions California and New Jersey, who do have high taxes when compared to the rest of the states, but those taxes are actually lower than New York. Look at this chart. At first, it seems he has a point. California's tax rate is 13.3%, which is actually higher than New York State, and Jersey is around where we are. They're at 10.75, and New York State is 10.9. But remember, New York City has its own personal income tax rate of 3.876. When we add them together, the tax rate for New York City jumps to 14.78, which is higher than California by roughly 1.5% and higher than New Jersey by more than 4%. So when he says that New Yorkers are leaving for other high tax states, he doesn't mention that while their tax rate is high, it's actually lower than ours. And just like all liberals, he never makes the point he thinks he's making. What he's really saying to us is New Yorkers are willing to pack up and move across the country to California just to save 1.5 percentage points on their taxes. That being the case, what do you think is going to happen when he raises it 51%? And this is before the increase, because remember, he wants to add another 2% to New York City income tax, bringing the total New York City personal income tax rate to 16.78%. Now you could see we're 3.5 points higher than California and more than 6 points higher than New Jersey. And remember, personal income tax is completely separate from corporate income tax. We've already discussed that the corporate tax rate in Jersey is 11.5%, which is lower than it is in New York right now before the increase. Do you know what the corporate tax rate is in California? 8.85%. Compare that to the proposed new corporate tax rate of 20% in New York City. What do you think is going to happen to businesses? They're all going to leave. Now listen to him lie and say that the real reason people are leaving isn't because of taxes, it's because of quality of life.
So it's not fiscal policy, it's quality of life. And ultimately, the reason I want to increase these taxes on the top 1%, the most profitable corporations, is to increase quality of life for everyone, including those who are going to be taxed. So what it then comes down to is, why are they leaving? Is it fiscal policy or is it actually quality of life? And I've heard that time and again from wealthier New Yorkers, from all New Yorkers.
How are you going to increase the quality of life when you want to defund the NYPD? And stop denying it. You've already done it. Not only have you canceled the class of 5,000 cops that were set to go in, but you also cut $22 million from the NYPD's budget. Do you think having less cops on the street is going to make crime go up or down? You say you're concerned about quality of life, yet you want to decriminalize prostitution. And don't tell me these aren't kids. Ask any cop, ask any vice cop, or anyone that worked in special victims how many underage kids they see in sex trafficking cases. And it all starts from a market that you want to decriminalize. Do you think seeing kids in miniskirts walking up and down the streets selling their bodies, do you think that's going to improve the quality of life? You also want to decriminalize the reckless use of e-bikes. You know, the lunatics that speed all over the city and slam into pedestrians? Eric Adams formed a task force to crack down on them and reduced collisions from 15,000 to just under 7,000 in 1 year. And you took that policy and threw it right out the window. This is from the New York Post. Starting March 27th, the NYPD will no longer issue criminal summonses to e-bikers for violating traffic offenses such as blowing stop signs or illegally zipping along city sidewalks, City Hall officials said. And the reason you ended this crackdown is because your administration fears it could lead to drivers losing their licenses or for those in the country illegally to possibly being deported. It's funny how you have no problem letting illegals blow through stop signs and red lights, drive on the sidewalk, and ignore the speed limit, yet you reduced our speed limit from 25 miles an hour in the school zone down to just 15. The next time you're driving, I want you to go 15 miles an hour to see how ridiculous this is. This is just another attempt to squeeze more money out of the middle class through fines. It has nothing to do with reducing accidents because he just lifted the enforcement on e-bikes. Now, you might be asking yourself, why do I have to drive 15 miles an hour when they're allowed to speed with impunity? It's because you're an American citizen and they're here illegally. And he needs to protect his voter base. And apparently the commie thinks that having thousands of illegals speed throughout our entire city and disobey all the traffic laws is somehow going to improve our quality of life. Now let's talk about homeless encampments. You lifted the ban on those, which caused 26 people to die. You have no desire to rein in the deranged homeless people walking our streets. So the bums that you see squatting and taking dumps on sidewalks, that's going to continue. Is that going to improve the quality of life? What about safe injection sites? Places where junkies can go and shoot up with the help of doctors and nurses to make sure they do it correctly. I made a short about this. It's only about 60 seconds. Please take a look.
You want to decriminalize the possession and use of small amounts of opioids, including heroin. How would that solve the crisis?
That's exactly right. So we need to decriminalize opiates for personal use. We have to let the country know this is not a personal failing. This was a systemic government failing. And then we need to open up safe consumption and safe injection sites around the country because they save lives.
Did you hear that last part? Yang wants to open up safe injection sites. This is a place where addicts can go to shoot up under the supervision of medical personnel to make sure they do it correctly. This is what it looks like on the inside. You can see they have all their works out. You show up. It's like a buffet for doing drugs. You have tourniquets, wipes, pick out the needle of your choice. They provide you with everything. And then you pick out a booth, and then you shoot up. That's what it looks like on the inside. This is what it looks like on the outside. This is what our masked children get to see on their way to school. Not only do you support these sites as mayor, but you also push for this when you were a state assemblyman. You think having junkies shoot up in front of children, walking around like zombies, you think that's going to improve the quality of life? Nothing in your plan will ever improve the quality of life. Now let's go back and listen to him mislead you about the number of millionaires in New York.
One of the biggest issues about taxing the wealthiest New Yorkers is the possibility that they leave New York. So the top 1% of New Yorkers pay somewhere between 40 and 48% of the total revenue for New York City taxes. If a couple hundred of them are mobile and have a private plane and can live in Florida and come here, 150 days a year, that's a problem. What do you do about that?
I think you get back to first the facts, because capital flight is always spoken about whenever we talk about the potential of increasing taxes on the wealthy. What we've seen is that since 2021, when New York State increased taxes on the wealthiest New Yorkers, the number of millionaires actually increased in this state.
So it's talk. They're going to go to Florida and all you think is talk.
In 2021, when I came to the state assembly, we had the same fight to fund public schools, to raise taxes on billionaires and corporations. We were told millionaires would flee.
Yep.
And we now have more millionaires.
We're talking about a major change in the tax system that would hasten departures that are already happening. Again, we've lost hundreds of thousands of wealthy New Yorkers already.
We now have more millionaires than we did in 2021 in this state.
Of course we have more millionaires today in New York City than we did 5 years ago. That's based simply on inflation. And again, he's using raw numbers. Look at this table. It shows New York City had 18,355 millionaires in 2010, and in 2022, that number jumped to 33,765. So the number of millionaires in New York City almost doubled during that 12-year period. But they tripled in California, they tripled in Texas, and they quadrupled in Florida. And while the raw number of millionaires went up in New York City's share of millionaires went down from 6.5% to 4.2%. And while that doesn't seem like a big deal, it's actually a drop of 35%. Do you know what the cost of losing those millionaires did to New York's tax revenue? It decreased it by $13.2 billion. $10.7 billion for New York State and $2.5 billion for New York City. That's $13 billion New York doesn't have. And during those 12 years, the tax rate of New York City didn't increase. It only went up in New York State. You could see that if you made $1 million in 2010, you were taxed at a rate of 8.97%. But in 2022, the rate increased to 9.65%. That's an increase in percentage terms of just 7%. Do you see how dangerous his tax plan is? Taxes went up just 7%, and the percentage of millionaires went down by 35%. What do you think is going to happen when he raises personal income taxes by 51% and taxes on businesses by 59%? All of the high income earners are going to move. And when they do, he's going to tax you, the middle class. In fact, he's already started this process by submitting a proposal to lower the estate tax threshold of $7.1 million down to just $750,000. $750,000 is nothing for an estate in New York City. The average home sells for way more than that. And you're not going to be able to leave your home to your children like you planned. And he's also asking Hochul to raise the top rate from 16% all the way up to 50%. And you thought he was only going to tax the rich. Mamdani will destroy New York City. He's going to be the worst mayor we've ever had. That's all I got for you on this video. Thank you for staying to the end. If you like this video, please consider subscribing. It'll motivate me to make more videos. Thank you again, and I hope to see you on the next video.
And the reason that I'm confident is all I'm speaking about is a 2% increase in income taxes for New Yorkers who make $1 million or more a year. And when it comes to corporations, it's matching our state's top corporate tax rate, 7.25%, to that of New Jersey, 11.5%. That's why I believe that this is both feasible and necessary, but I'm going to meet with business leaders about this. I've already started having those conversations because I do not want them to leave. I want them to stay. And the reason I think that we can have them stay is we're going to use this money to create a better quality of life, even for themselves.